If there were a subtitle to this podcast, it would be Think Better About Less. Discernment Digest, Think Better About Less. The target audience is the dear flock that God has entrusted to my care and to the care of several godly leaders at Community Bible Church in Trenton, Michigan. If anyone else hears about it and benefits, that's a bonus, but it's for our church and for our congregation to grow in the discipline of discernment, which requires being intentionally and carefully discriminating regarding your sources of information, and then thinking well about what those chosen sources communicate. But it's made all the more difficult since we're bombarded with disinformation, that is, intentionally false information, as opposed to misinformation, which is inadvertently false. And that's in keeping with the likes of Steve Bannon and what I mentioned last week, his, quote, flood the zone with excrement approach. Just this past week, on Wednesday, a friend posted, remember like 6 days ago when Trump tweeted a video that had the Obamas as apes, and there was a brief uproar as his press secretary explained it away, and then they all blamed a staffer, and then everybody just moved on? Good stuff, he says. We live in such unserious, stupid times. To which I replied, Bannon's flood the zone with excrement strategy works. The overwhelming assault on the mind causes many to simply revert to whatever their tribe says is good or bad about the latest chaos. Another example of just being overwhelmed with so much that we forget what was claimed in the first place is the Epstein files. You may recall that candidate Trump said when he's elected, we'll release them. And now Attorney General Pam Bondi said we'd do so, and even claimed she had Epstein's client list on her desk. And then about 12 months ago, just a month into the new administration, she had social media influencers to the White House, and after their meeting, these influencers proudly displayed white binders on the covers of which said, The Epstein Files Phase 1. But it's been slow-rolled, and it's had to be forced on the administration, so much so that one characterized the phases we've gone through with the Epstein Files this way. We went from, if I'm elected, I'm going to release all of it and probably put a bunch of people in prison. 2, that wasn't the whole file that Pam gave you. What? That's crazy. We'll get that released right away. 2, what file? It's a Democrat hoax. It's fake news. 2, you can have it over my dead body. It's all these child porn photos anyway. 2, fine, I'll release it. I was always going to release it. Always been a big fan of releasing it. 2, and this is what the president said just Thursday of this past week, this is boring, and the entire world in response freaks out over it's not at all boring content, and we have 2.5 million pages that are still unreleased. And we were treated to the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, one of those who assured us that we would see all the files on Capitol Hill testifying before Congress. And perhaps you saw at least portions of her, I don't know what else to call it, her performance. And so failure to be selective means that your God-given mind is open to assault by grifters, by bots, by algorithms, trolls, charlatans, hucksters, politicians, but I repeat myself, influencers, liars. Did I miss anyone? And on it goes. Failing to listen to fewer voices and then calmly assess what those sources chosen for their quality say, then we're left with choosing a tribe, listening only to those in our tribe who tell us what we want to hear, who gin up fear and anxiety and anger so that you're motivated to come back day after day, night after night, to get your fix and come away with only vague notions about the other side, how bad and dangerous they are, how much you despise, perhaps even hate them, all in the good cause of preserving what you've come to believe is most important, when the Bible teaches other persons and things are priority. For a few decades now, those of you who can listen to media during the day, whether at work with headphones on or at home with the radio or TV on, for decades you've tuned in to the same people. Right-wing radio has been wildly successful. Now, I talk about right-wing radio because I'm talking to people who are right, who are conservative, as I am. Doesn't mean that the left doesn't engage in disinformation. It certainly does. It's just that few, if any, people listening to my voice also listen to those voices. And so I say right-wing radio has been wildly successful, led by the late Rush Limbaugh, who had the ears of conservative people for 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, over decades. I listened to Rush for years, but I stopped because I'm very quick to pull the plug when you show me who you are. And Rush showed me who he was back in the 90s. And I want to recount for you how that happened as a means of showing you how I think we all need to, if we're going to be discerning, be also quick to dismiss people once they show us who they are, so that we indeed think about less, think better about less. And so I listened to Rush for years, but I stopped because, as I said, I'm quick to pull the plug once you show me who you are. And Rush did, back in the 90s, show me who he was. He had helped pull off an amazing electoral victory for Republicans in 1994, and they took control of the House of Representatives for the first time in, believe it or not, 40 years. It had been since 1954 that Republicans had controlled the House of Representatives. Newt Gingrich became the Speaker, and the Republicans were a force to keep the president, who was elected in 92 and again in 96, Bill Clinton. They were able to keep him somewhat in check. Now, one way they kept him in check was through investigations in the House and in the Senate. But the Department of Justice also chimed in with the appointment of several independent counsels to look into accusations of wrongdoing by Clinton and his wife Hillary, both before and during his time in office, and by several people in his cabinet. Now, let me just stop to say that I say the Department of Justice chimed in. That would be the Department of Justice that works under Chief Executive, in this case, Bill Clinton. So when they appoint these independent counsels, they're appointing counsels to look into their Democrat president's potential wrongdoing. And I just ask you, do you see that today? Do you see people of the same party being willing to look into the potential wrongdoing of those that are in their party? One way they kept him in check was through these investigations. And Bill's scandals included his use of Arkansas state troopers to secure women for him while he was the governor of that state. And that followed him into the White House. One of those women was named Paula Jones, and she sued him while he was the president. And that case was notable for a couple of reasons. One, the suit was going forward while Clinton was president. His lawyers argued he could not be sued while president, but they lost in court. The case went forward, and Clinton ended up settling with Paula Jones for $850,000. But secondly, in the course of that Paula Jones case, in which, of course, Clinton and his attorneys had said she was lying, Jones's lawyers sought testimony from dozens of other women with whom the good governor had trysts. And importantly, from one who had allegedly been involved with him while president recently, a very young White House intern named Monica Lewinsky. The Lewinsky affair, alleged to have happened in the White House itself and while he was president, prompted, again, the Clinton Justice Department to ask independent counsel, a man named Kenneth Starr, to add that case to what he was already working on for them. He agreed, forced Clinton to testify in a federal hearing. He lied about the affair under oath, which was later proven. He lost his law license. He was impeached, but he was not removed from office because there were not enough votes for removal in the Senate. Our Constitution requires the House of Representatives to vote in a majority for the impeachment. They did that. And then it goes to the Senate. There are 100 senators, 2/3 of whom have to vote for a conviction and removal. That's 67 votes, and they weren't able to get the 67. In fact, in the history of our country, we have had some impeachments. Donald Trump's been impeached twice by the House of Representatives. Bill Clinton was impeached, but not removed. No one has ever been removed from the office of the presidency by the Senate. So it was in the course of testifying in that case that Clinton infamously answered one question with, quote, "It depends on what the meaning of the word is." Some of you may recall that absurdity. Now, I said Kenneth Starr had the Lewinsky matter added on to what he was already working on. What was that? Well, several years earlier, soon after Clinton was elected in 92, Starr was appointed to look into a shady land deal back in Arkansas in which the Clintons had bought and sold property along the White River, and the scandal was known as Whitewater, not to be confused with Watergate, which goes back to the 70s and Richard Nixon. Now, this had been an issue for the Clintons going back years to their time in Arkansas, and it was worked on back then by some of their associates, especially legal associates of the now First Lady Hillary Clinton, during her time at the Rose Law Firm in Little Rock. Some of those people moved to Washington in 1993 when Bill became president, and now some of them would have to deal with Whitewater all over again. An independent counsel, Starr, would be given yet another thing into which to look. You see, one of Hillary's Little Rock Rose Law Firm colleagues who had worked with her was a man named Vince Foster. Foster had agreed to come to Washington to serve as the deputy White House counsel, but just 6 months later, Vince Foster took his own life in July of 1993. In the 6 months that he had worked in the White House, a big part of what he was working on was buttoning up the Whitewater matter from Arkansas, in part because the New York Times had been asking questions going back to early 1992 during the presidential campaign. And in fact, they had written several articles about it, even before Clinton was elected. Now, stay with me. Believe it or not, I will come back to Rush in a minute. Vince Foster took his own life in Fort Marcy Park. It's located about 5 or 6 miles from the White House, at a time when he was working on the Whitewater matter for the Clintons. His suicide became a great matter of interest to conspiracy theorists, especially those who hated the Clintons and believed that they had been involved in crimes going back to Bill's days as governor of Arkansas, beyond his philandering on the state's payroll with the help of state troopers. It was claimed that, for example, he had allowed illegal drugs to be flown into Mena Airport there, a place where 2 teenagers were found dead, and it was theorized that those 2 teenagers had just been at the wrong place at the wrong time, witnessing a drug handoff, and that they were murdered for it. In fact, there was a videotape back then. Now, this was before the days of DVDs or certainly streaming, and a VHS circulated for years that claimed that, in effect, Bill and Hillary Clinton were murderers, as it purported to document how many of their associates came up dead over the years. Vince Foster was one of those that would later be used in that so-called documentary called The Clinton Chronicles, and it was hawked in right-wing circles far and wide, including by the pastor of Thomas Road Baptist Church in Lynchburg, Virginia, and the chancellor of Liberty University, Jerry Falwell Sr. So what does that have to do with Rush Limbaugh as an example of someone on whom I pulled the plug quickly when he showed me who he was? Well, in those days, I listened to Rush. In some ways, it was his heyday as he had built a media empire. He had helped Republicans take the House for the first time in 4 decades, and it was back when he was much more lighthearted and humorous. Some of you may remember that he did skits and spoofs, and they were genuinely funny. I didn't listen much at all in the last 15 years or so, but the little that I heard was quite different than that. It was more angry and alarmist. But I wasn't surprised because of what he did in the 90s with Vince Foster. You see, I heard Rush talk about Foster's suicide this way. Quote, "I'm not talking about the suicide of Vince Foster. I'm talking about the death of Vince Foster," he said. And then he would go on to tell us why it was dubious at best that Foster took his own life and instead was probably the victim of foul play like so many others associated with the Clintons. And as Rush pushed this conspiracy, not only was it unfair to the Foster family, who are Roman Catholic, and at least at that time, Roman Catholicism taught that suicide was an automatic entry into hell. Now, the Roman Catholic Church has changed that belief in the years since, believe it or not. And so here, though, you have family members grieving deeply, but being made to wonder whether it was homicide instead of suicide. And it was prolonged because Ken Starr was asked to look into the circumstances of Foster's demise. He was the second counsel to look into it. There had been a man named Robert Fisk, a special counsel who had done so as well. And both Fisk and Starr concluded that Foster's death was indeed a suicide. But not only was it unfair to the Foster family as Rush pushed this false theory without proof, his evidence, and let me just stop to remind you, evidence is not proof. Many times people use those synonymously. They're not the same thing. Literally everything is evidence of something. The question is not evidence. The question is, does the evidence fit together to constitute proof? And that's a much higher bar. And Rush pushed this false theory without proof, and his evidence came primarily from a then relatively unknown journalist for the New York Post and then later the Pittsburgh Gazette, a man named Christopher Ruddy, who kept the homicide story going long after it had been debunked. But Rush kept extolling his professionalism on his radio show and interviewing him on Rush's short-lived TV show. You may not have known, or you may have forgotten, that in fact Rush tried TV for a while. And Christopher Ruddy, parlayed that fame to found something called Newsmax, a cable channel to the right of Fox News, where he is currently the CEO. Now look, I didn't like the Clintons then, and I don't now. Dan and Marilyn Quayle, who ran to be reelected as second couple with George and Barbara Bush the year that Clinton was elected in 92, they were my people. Moral, committed to one another, conservative in their politics and in their lives. And Marilyn grew up with Bible studies in her home, led on cassette tape by a man named R.B. Thiem. Thiem was a graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary. Marilyn was a trained attorney, but she chose to prioritize her children, something belittled by her counterpart, Hillary, in that campaign in 92, when she infamously said, quote, "I suppose I could have stayed home and baked cookies and had teas, but what I decided to do was fulfill my profession." Dan and Marilyn were in the same age group as Bill and Hillary, but I fully endorsed what the Quayles stood for, and I was and am firmly against what the Clintons represented. Marilyn's speech at the 92 Republican Convention still resonates with me. She said, "Much has been said lately about the need in this country for a generation of leadership, that the moment has come for a couple of baby boomers to take the helm of this great and complex nation, that the time has come for generational change. Well, Dan and I are members of the baby boom generation too. And yet our basic understanding of what constitutes good government and a good society is very different than that of the boomers who lead the other party. We are all shaped by the times in which we live. I came of age in a time of turbulent social change. Some of it was good, such as civil rights. Much of it was questionable. And she said this, but remember, not everyone joined the counterculture. Not everyone demonstrated, dropped out, took drugs, joined in the sexual revolution, or dodged the draft. She went on, not everyone concluded that American society was so bad that it had to be radically remade by social revolution. Not everyone believed that the family was so oppressive that women could only thrive apart from it. The majority of my generation lived by the credo our parents taught us. We believed in God, in hard work, in personal discipline, in our nation's essential goodness, and in the opportunity it promised those willing to work for it. And so most of us went to school, to church, and to work. We married and started families. We had a stake in the future, and though we knew some changes needed to be made, we did not believe in destroying America to save it. I, for one, would love to have someone's like that back. So back in those days, I was quick to believe just about any nefarious story about the Clintons because I didn't support them, didn't support their lifestyle, didn't support what they were pushing, and that's still the case today. But you know, friends, brothers and sisters, at some point for a Christian, decency and truth have to find their place, do they not? And for me, that sense formed from the time that I was a child in my Pentecostal holiness home, my fundamental Baptist schooling in churches. I could not countenance winning at all cost if the cost is what is moral and honest. So I, in effect, wrote Rush off about 30 years ago. Because one, as far as I know, neither Rush nor Ruddy ever apologized to the Foster family for pushing a false and harmful story. Now, if some of our listeners know different, then I'll give you an email address to contact me, and I would love to hear about it. But as far as I know, that's the case. And secondly, frankly, in addition to the Vince Foster matter, you know, when someone has been married 4 times, as Rush was, and was addicted to medications and charged with prescription fraud, when that's the case, then you're not one of my go-to people for advice on life. And ditto for my dismissal of pretty much the whole Fox News ethos, which touts itself pro-family, but then is plagued by scandals and anti-family behavior from the likes of Bill O'Reilly when he was there. It's the very reason he's no longer there, because of a phone sex scandal and because of accusations of harassment, sexual harassment of subordinates. Roger Ailes, which founded Fox News, the late Roger Ailes. And he was accused by multiple women who had worked there, including Gretchen Carlson, who won a very large financial award in court. Sean Hannity, divorcing his wife to marry Ainsley, I think it is, from The Morning Show. Eric Bowles being dismissed for sexual harassment, only to find a job at the aforementioned Newsmax, and on it goes. Or you have someone like Carrie Prejean, and now her married name Bowles, who was in the news this past week as part of the president's Religious Liberty Commission, but was dismissed due to her anti-Israel comments this past week when the commission met. She was Miss California in 2009, and as part of that pageant, she was asked about how she felt about a handful of states at that time adopting the right for gays to marry, and she said, I'm against that. I'm against gay marriage. She said that very clearly. She became a hero on Fox, who would show her prancing practically nude in her bikini over and over back when I was still sometimes watching Hannity, and I, as a result, turned him off, never to return. But just like many Christians were discipled by Rush for hours a day, months each year, and years of our lives, others of you just turn on your favorite tribe spigot in the morning and you give it your ear all day. And that's a spigot that comes from a dedicated pipeline that's disconnected from any others who have their own chosen pipeline, so that we're hearing completely different versions of the same story. If you were to just flip between a Fox News and MSNBC, and if they have the same story going, you'll hear it slanted in completely different ways. There was a legend that went around some time ago that some have Fox News on all day for so long, every day, so that the Fox News logo is burned into the bottom right of their screen. And I heard one guy recounting that legend and admitting he can't prove it, but he said, it's just too good to check. But I suppose the same could be said about MSNBC and CNN if any of our handful of listeners watch those. So our subtitle could be, as I said earlier, Think Better About Less. And that thinking about less starts with a quick trigger and a willingness to pull the plug as soon as someone shows their character, because after all, you do not need them in your ear. Please understand that. And so a key discernment rule is, do not suffer fools nor scoundrels. If someone is proven wrong in their claims, dismiss them. If someone is wrong in their behavior, dismiss them. That alone will greatly reduce the number of voices that you entertain. It will lessen the relentless assault on your mind, and it will allow you to evaluate better in the calm that results. Friends, you don't owe anyone your ear, no matter how cool, influential, or famous. The only one to whom you owe your ear is the Lord himself. So reduce your intake so you can avoid this conversation that a pastor posted saying, I've had some version of this conversation several times over the past year or so. Someone says to him, he says, hey, what do you think about this conspiracy with the Jews? Or the moon landing thing? Or Erica Kirk and what Candace is saying about her? Or the Nephilim in Genesis chapter 6? And then the pastor says, I say to them, can I ask you a question first? And they say, sure. And he says, what's your approach to life insurance? Are you going whole life or term? And they say, what does that have to do with this? He says, humor me. And they say, I honestly haven't thought about that. To which he says, that's exactly the point. You should be thinking about things like that. You should be thinking about how to secure your family if you die. You should be thinking about wealth transfer to your children. There are a lot of real possibilities or responsibilities that demand clear thought. Your kids' education, the culture of your home, the well-being of your wife, vocational and skill development, long-term stability. There's a lot we should be thinking about, but instead we're thinking about what the people to whom we give our ear tell us we should. Now, I said last week, our toleration now for what we once rejected is due to a long moral slide that shows up in culture, but also a very important theological error. It's embraced and promoted by the very evangelical warriors we chose to follow, namely the error that we, Christians and the church, have to win in the here and now. And I said that we would trace the development of the fundamentalist evangelical divide and begin to look at the aberrant theology that led us to this win whatever it takes approach. Well, in preparation for that, I decided to do what I've laid out here, namely give an example in Rush and in Ruddy and Fox to show how we need to reclaim a very low to zero tolerance for fools and scoundrels. I look to further show how we got here and how we can hopefully learn from it then in the next episode. If you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to email discern@cbctrenton.com. I hope you can listen again next Monday. In the meantime, have a great week serving and discerning.